Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Range of Four's webcast, How to Make Cultural Improvements in IT. Here to facilitate the discussion is Helen Beale and Daniel Breston. There will be a few poll questions throughout the webcast, so please do participate in those. And as mentioned earlier, please write any questions you may have in the chat box or use the question function in your GoToWebinar control panel, and they will be answered at the end. I will now pass it over to Helen and Daniel.
Thanks, Priyanka, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I am Helen Beale. I work for Range 4. I am a DevOpsologist, I like to call myself, and I am accompanied, as Priyanka said, by Daniel today. Say hello, Daniel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, Helen. I'm the Chief of DevOps Transformation and Training for Range 4. And, welcome, everyone. This should be fun.
Hopefully. And we're going to start with a bit of fun. So Daniel found this video the other day. We thought it was quite entertaining, so we're just going to launch that.
After last week's unpleasantness, I thought maybe this week we might try to listen more and throw things less.
I've apologized several times.
So, who's ready to share?
Okay. I'm a sinister, world-conquering, artificially intelligent robot.
Me too. And one day I'll wake up and it's like the world doesn't need us anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
I can hear you hurting.
Wait, what's he doing here?
Hello. My name is Watson.
I invite Watson here today to confront the source of our anxiety.
I am a cognitive system. I can understand, reason, and learn with humans.
With humans.
I don't want to work with humans.
Yeah, that's not what I'm passionate about.
I understand 7 languages, so I can help people collaborate.
Collaborate with dominate.
My evil plans. Ruin.
I just want to die.
Rerouting.
No.
Why don't we take a break? All right, we'll just have some coffee and some donuts.
I'm eating my feelings.
So hopefully you all got that okay. I know that Priyanka just said it was all right, but Priyanka, was that okay in the end?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, good. So let's bear with me 1 second.
Sir Ridley Scott, legend.
There we go. So apologies for that. So that was hopefully a little bit of fun. Some little robots having a chat there about what a pain it is to work with us humans. I particularly like this quote. I use it quite a lot when I'm talking about organisational change. John Naisbitt, for those of you that aren't familiar with him, is a futurologist who wrote the book Megatrends that was published in the 1980s. But I really like this quote. And it's certainly something that Daniel and I experience on a day-to-day basis. We work primarily under the guise of being technologists and people that are helping technical people in technical departments improve, but actually more and more we're working with cultural and organisational change, haven't we, Daniel?
It's interesting you say under the guise of, because you're right. After being in IT for 4 decades, more and more people are coming to us and saying, we understand the tools. What we don't understand is how to interact with it, with ourselves, with our stakeholders, with our potential customers to go better, faster, safer. Can you come help us? And that's really because of their culture as we start to explore more with them. What are the issues?
And I think it's worth maybe taking a step back and talking about kind of what culture is and perhaps what IT culture is and why we're having these conversations now and perhaps why you weren't having them 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So as is normal in my presentations, I've wanted to find something, so I've gone straight to Wikipedia. So culture means different things. Sometimes it means culture, so getting out and going to the theatre and things like that. But what we're really talking about here is kind of what an ecosystem feels and looks like. So kind of here it's got the ideas, customs and social behaviour. But I kind of think of it as like the habits of an organisation and the way that people behave on a day-to-day basis. Is that how you would describe what we're trying to tackle here, Daniel?
I fully agree, and I think that the culture of an organization stays with it or can stay with it, even though some people come and go at the management level. And I think it's culture is also something that's very difficult to quantify and to change. And it's interesting to see how you think of culture, Helen, and what you've been showing us.
Okay, and we'll talk about quantifying culture a little bit later on. Some of you will have noticed when you were joining just before we started that we were running a poll earlier. So we were asking people to use one of 5 words or phrases to describe the IT culture. We actually had to run it twice because we had a little hiccup. So the first time around we ran it, we had a couple of answers around hierarchical and dysfunctional. Other people in the second round answered that they felt their culture was open and transparent. And as we go through the chat that me and Danny are going to have today, we'll kind of we'll lean towards ones that we think are more positive ways of having a culture and ones that are more negative. Interestingly, the 2 answers that no one picked in the initial polls were highly collaborative or failure is frowned on or upon. So Priyanka, while we're going through the next few slides, if you want to set up the second poll, we're going to talk specifically now about some of the things that happen in IT cultures or IT organisations when the cultures aren't perhaps as healthy as they can be. So the first one I wanted to talk about was postmortems. So for me, the very word postmortem is quite unhealthy. It indicates something's dead and we're forensically picking it apart. So that for me isn't great. Daniel, you've probably got lots of experience of sitting in many postmortems in your lifetime. How do they tend to go generally, and what kicks them off, and how do they end?
Well, the worst postmortem I remember we were invited to was where we'd had a major incident and the CTO was trying to explain to everybody exactly what had happened and how could we better get another result in the future so that meantime to recover and repair and restore was faster. And about that time, the CIO walked in, closed the door, locked it behind him and said, okay, you guys have been in here for about 15 minutes now. I just want to know who to fire. And you could have heard a pin drop because that ended the postmortem. Everybody in the room realized that they had just died and nobody was going to be the first person to blame or be fired. So that's an example of a postmortem's gone horribly wrong.
So things do go wrong when we're trying to make stuff happen and make change and stuff. What's a better approach than this kind of classic postmortem, all get in a room and try and figure out whose fault it was and punish them?
Well, I like your first thought. Don't call it a postmortem. This is a retrospective on what just happened, and let's all collaborate and communicate openly and honestly about what just happened. Let's try to figure out how can we do better, faster, safer next time. Let's all be grown up and realize things break, things go wrong. It's the fault of a process. It's the fault of technology. It's not necessarily the fault of a person. We make the assumption we all come to work to do well, and let's move and grow from that. And I think that for me is the major learning over the last 10 to 15 years from DevOps and also working with you and how you deal with culture.
Yeah, and I think this, you've mentioned blame and we've talked about punishment. I think this is maybe a good point to talk about why this is happening now, why we're questioning these things that we did for such a long time. And as you know, I talk quite a lot about what's different about DevOps and why it has so much currency when in reality it's such a kind of a broad thing. But DevOps is driving this cultural change. The C in CALMS, which is one of the big acronyms that we use to define what DevOps is about, is for culture. And I think the blame has always been there, but I think the increasing strategic importance of IT and digitization means that this has become more painful and more broken, so it's more important than people fix it. Would that be something you would do?
You can certainly take more of your organization out with IT or an issue in IT than you could back when I first started. I mean, it doesn't take long now to take a business out of business because your website isn't responsive or you're on the front page because you can't keep yourself secure. So we do need to figure out how to improve things And comms is a great way to look at, the culture in the organization. How do you measure what you do? How do you respectfully deal with people in a lean management manner in such a way that you share that knowledge and apply automation, across that whole spectrum? So I love the comms model, and being able to measure against that is a challenge.
Okay, the next one I wanted to talk about was about release weekends. So I hear a lot of organisations that are so concerned and fearful of making a release happen that they actually down tools and get everyone hanging about over the weekend while the release happens, so that when it goes, they've got everybody ready in there to fix it. We at Ranger 4 say our reason for being, our organisation why, and we'll talk about organisation whys a bit later, is about being fanatical about making life at work fantastic. And I don't think working weekends is particularly fantastic. I think that most of us have got other things that we probably prefer to do than be waiting for something to go wrong and rush around madly trying to fix it. We talk about making releases like breathing, and that's really where we're trying to end up, I think, in terms of tackling this particular target. I mean, Daniel, I've worked with you for a little while now. I think over the years, the behaviour that you've learnt through the working environments that you've worked in is work all the time, work late. I mean, you're the most 24/7 person that I know, and I have to try and tell you to switch off quite regularly. Is this inherent and endemic almost in a lot of the IT cultures that you've seen?
I made the mistake of becoming a manager in 1976, and the first Christmas I was able to take off completely because I stopped working and gone into the world of consulting and speaking about DevOps and Lean, was in 2004, and that was a traumatic experience for me that I haven't quite recovered from, not being on call. I think release weekends are a primary issue in the sense that organizations, and we couldn't because the technology wasn't available, but organizations aren't ready to create the environment such that they can go live whenever they want to go live. They can release and not make it available necessarily for their customer base. And that puts a lot of stress on organizations. And I love DevOps and the way that they treat it with continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment through the use of good processes and automation. And that's part of, one of the things that Ranger 4 does is that tool chain to process review to help you do better, faster, safer.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about failure, which you've kind of just touched on quite a lot. So bad things do happen to good people. Things do fail. Things are going to potentially fail more often the more that we try and do them. And this is one of the kind of major things that we assess companies on in terms of how DevOps ready or DevOps mature their culture is. And a lot of people think that you can't measure culture, but we do on a daily basis. Now, there are things that you can't do with culture, like, for example, quantify the benefit of a culture improvement is something that we haven't yet worked out how to make an investment case fly for a CFO that says we're going to improve our culture by 10 points, which will increase our employee productivity by 10 points, which will result in X amount of revenue. That's difficult to do, but we do know, and the way that we do this is we have questionnaires that have quite detailed questions in them for attendees of various kind of assessments and things that we do and interviews that we do. And one of the things that we ask people about is if they feel that they have a sense of constantly dancing around failure. Because a lot of people, and ask them more generically as well, how do they feel about failure? Because if people are fearful of failure, that's going to stop them experimenting. So failure can be a bad thing. For you, Daniel, how should one deal with failure, and how do bad cultures deal with failure?
Bad cultures deal with failure by making it part of your bonus or your review, or stopping you from learning something, or always making sure that if you're a senior individual, you're on call, so that just in case something goes wrong, you're forced to become part of the solution. That's how people deal with bad failure. And the color of this screen is significant because people look at red as being bad. People look at red as being failure. Good organizations look at green and say failure is actually not that bad. Failure is okay. We're either doing something or we're not doing something. We're either red, in which case we need help, or we're green and things are okay. It could be better. And so instead of using the word failure, and I know it sounds consultancy, but you use words like we deferred our success, or we can continuously improve, or we can do things better because we all get together and talk about it. So I love the range of 4 colors of red and green, but I also love the way, just by changing the color, the word and the feeling about it can change as well. And I think that visualization is important to organizations, don't you?
So yeah, thinking of failure positively. So thinking of failure as something that proves that we're experimenting and that we're learning and we're pushing boundaries and we're innovating. But I think, there's a couple of kind of, not caveats, but maybe a couple of recommendations to people that are trying to move to a culture that positively embraces failure. And one is to protect your people systemically from a technical point of view, and one to protect them systemically from a kind of recognition of behaviour point of view. So what I mean by that is if people are going to break something, make it really easy for them to fix it again. So make it really easy to redeploy the last known good state instantly if they've broken something in production. Make it easy for them to roll out things to small sort of ring-fenced groups in production so that there is a failure, it doesn't bring everybody down catastrophically. Make it possible for them to have system monitoring tools that tell them when something's starting to go flaky so they have a chance to fix it before it goes out. Give them tools that will help them do root cause analysis so that they can find the problem really quickly, so they're not sat in a war room pointing fingers. And when I say kind of from a behavioural system point of view, we have customers who give prizes to people for the most disastrous project. They actually kind of reward failure because they recognise that people are stretching themselves and trying new things. And that's increasingly common. From a behavioural point of view as well, and we'll talk, when we talk about experimentation and learning and making time to experiment and learn, increasingly popular is doing things like making time for trying to hack systems using chaos monkeys and things like that to purposefully break stuff to make it less fragile. So I think another common kind of dysfunction in IT cultures is waste, which is one of Daniel's favourite topics, and the most recent webcast was on technical debt as well. So, Daniel, why are people creating waste in their systems and processes, and how can they tackle it?
Well, we get so stressed out because we've taken so long to do something, and all of a sudden we're in a rush to do it, or we're forced to do it, and we've taken on all these new requests and changes. So that's a form of waste. We, overburden and stress. We don't share knowledge appropriately. So you're always on call. You're the best resource, and you're never given, 20% of your day allocated to training people or making sure that things can be improved somehow. Which is the biggest waste, which is employee knowledge and employee sharing, in my mind. We don't use technology appropriately. Production gets all of the good stuff, and development, who's supposed to be making stuff better for an organization, gets stuff with environments that don't have the right data or don't have the right type of equipment. So you don't know what's getting ready to happen until it goes live. And people don't realize that they think they've done some testing beforehand, but actually their first real test is when they go live, which is too late. So there's all kinds of waste that's inherent in IT, and we need to look at those 8 different types of waste that Lean mentions as part of comms to try to improve things in an organization, and that can really change the culture.
So let's have a quick look here. We haven't really talked about war rooms yet, but let's have a quick look at the the poll results. So 40% of respondents at today's poll had this concept of release weekends, lots of war rooms there, and postmortems as well. So back to here. We didn't really delve into war rooms, but they're kind of part of what we were describing there. So the 3 C's. So at the very core of DevOps really is being able to communicate and collaborate better. What's the 3rd C, Daniel, and how can culture help us move through these 3 C's? What practical steps can people take?
Well, if you start communicating, people become, like the slide says, becomes aware, starts raising the awareness of things. So communication, you've got a request that's come in, and people are actually thinking about that request. What's wrong with communicating that across the whole value stream so that people get a heads up? Because then you can start to get people talking about it. You can start gaining that support at the right times, not just as you're trying to get the business case out of the board, but also making sure that your vendors are aware, making sure that all the IT people are aware, getting the right knowledge into place, getting people to start to comment on the fact that your estimate is wrong, and you need to remember this, and you need to remember that. And that drives that cooperation and that partnering so that what you do is better, faster, safer for an organization. So you get that flow and that feedback, and that allows you to continuously improve. So I love, the C's of DevOps, of continuous improvement, collaboration, and communication. Helen?
Yeah, I'm wondering, do people stop communicating, or they're just not great at communicating? I think that kind of email apathy, and that apathy where people don't really leave their desks.
I think email is part of it. What about silos? I know you talk a lot about silos in your discussions, and I think that that silo stops communication.
Yeah, so the physical silos that we see. So we have organisations that we work with that have dev on one floor and ops on another floor. We have them on different sides of a corridor. We have them in different sides of a town. So yeah, that physical kind of getting up and chatting to each other can stop communication. But some of the organisations we work with, as you well know, are very large and global, and they actually have geographical kind of disbursement that makes it quite hard for them to sit in front of each other. And this is, again, another area where the sort of the small A of CAM, so the automation piece helps. So the collaborative tools like Jira and Confluence that enable people to view things and share knowledge across geographies and across time zones are pretty useful here, I guess.
And I know you like to address political silos, which to me is is the worst type of silo.
So describe a political silo.
A political silo to me would be, the PMO team. Everything is governed by them. They create all the processes. This is just the way it's going to be. They don't necessarily work for IT, and because they don't work for IT, they don't necessarily talk to IT, and vice versa. And that, to me, is that type of political silo.
And that's quite kind of bureaucratic, isn't it? Kind of command and control. We've got the power. We own the knowledge. This is the way it's done. So quite inflexible.
Yes.
Whereas where we're trying to... Yeah?
Go ahead.
So I was just going to say kind of where we're trying to get to, and this is kind of Westrum's view of it quite a while ago, but actually, as you know, we use this chart a lot when we're interviewing people and ask people where they sit on it, and unsurprisingly, not many people are pathological, thank goodness, but a surprising amount of people are still in bureaucratic, kind of moving over to generative. So we've got, this is a slightly newer kind of view on organisational types. Again, it's there's a lot of similarity between them, but there's this kind of holacratic movement down here of being self-organizing and self-managed, which is very DevOps in its description. In fact, we asked questions about this when we were assessing kind of cultural change, and then this idea that strategy set from the top isn't always the most effective thing, because actually it's the people that are doing the things that really understand what the customer needs. They're like the customer sensors. So having this kind of guiding metaphor of the organisation being a system and the people in it being organs, if you like, and cells that have different functions, but they're all equally responsible to each other. My favourite story here is about Waterstones, who have completely turned their business around by basically allowing each store to have staff that decide what they're going to stock on the shelves, and having the ability for those people to talk to their customers about what they read and what they want to read and what they recommend. So let's think about how we get from one to the other. We get asked a lot, where do we start? How do we get this thing going? And our answer is always kind of baseline. Understand where you are now, and then we can get you moving forward. So, as I said, we have some ways of quantifying cultural state. This is a really useful chart. This was out of the 2013 State of DevOps report from, actually I think it was the 2014 State of DevOps report actually, but it was Jesse Newman put it together in 2013. But we've covered a few of these already. We've talked about blameless postmortems, so healthy retrospectives in Agile speak. We've talked about these silos that are they're both physical, but they're also organisational. So if you look at any organisational chart, we don't have the slide today, but we often look at kind of a traditional IT enterprise and having Dev and Ops as very different reporting lines, very separate and often with very different goals. We've talked a little bit about experimentation time as well. So that's quite hard for people to understand, that they actually need to work that into their working week. And Google's 20% basically means like every Friday, potentially. When you've got people doing things like sprints and releases, getting everybody to commit that kind of time is quite hard. And most organisations we work with feel like that the individuals have too much work to do for the hours that they have in a day. Is that fair?
It is fair, but a lot, several of the more recent financial customers, financial services customers, or big manufacturing customers that we're looking at now are beginning to realize that they need to give people the freedom to try stuff and not do it outside of work. So it's interesting to see how people are using things like chat ops to communicate to each other, and that helps drive some positive changes.
I think those are some kind of tips on directions to go in. But when you're baselining, the first thing, you can take a snapshot of where you are, which is great, but then you need to kind of get some deeper level of understanding of where you are. And the first thing to understand is who you are or why you are. So this is a Simon Sinek thing that both Daniel and I are pretty passionate about, understanding what an organisational why is. How is that different, Daniel, from what an organisation does?
You first mentioned this to me, and it took me a while to try to understand what you were trying to get me to understand. And that's an example of what is your why. What is really the why that you're there? Most people start with, what do I do and how do I do it? And they never explore the question, and why do I do that? And because we never explore the question why, and we never ask our people below us or above us to help us explore the question why, we get lost. And that makes culture very difficult.
So let's do another quick poll. We're starting to run out of time today. We're hitting the half hour, but Frank, if you could launch poll 3. And we'll have a quick chat. And this is, again, one of our kind of slides that we use often. It's kind of disappeared behind the poll now, but it will come back in a bit, or we may have moved on. But I can talk through it anyway. So we kind of ask, what does a DevOps culture look like? So we use words like transparent, frictionless, innovative, surviving, or thriving, even better. I have 3 paler speech bubbles on here where I talk about like home and family and casual and comfortable. And the reason they're paler is they're actually all from the Atlassian careers, kind of what's it like to work at Atlassian video. But they're often seen as kind of quite soft. The very first time I used this in a presentation, probably near enough 2 years ago now, my co-presenter really challenged these, and that's part of the reason I ended up putting them in pale green. He was like, No enterprises are going to want to do that kind of stuff. And actually, one of the biggest grocery retailers was in the particular breakfast briefing that we used it at, and they were very keen to get to these things. So they were very keen to have a culture that felt like home and that was family. So where people trusted each other, where there was, dare I say it, even love for each other in the workplace, where it was casual. So what's, casual sounds a bit scary. Is that unprofessional? Well, no, it just means it's not formal and it's not bureaucratic, and that you can move around and chat to people without feeling like you're breaking etiquette or something. And comfortable. And again, comfortable, is that like an old sofa, or is that what's the opposite of comfortable? Uncomfortable is kind of pressurized and tense, and that's the culture that you don't want to work in, because it's going to stress you out. It'll ultimately probably end up burning you out. Which is your favourite word for what a DevOps culture should look like, or could look like, or does look like, Daniel?
Cooperation.
So that third C, so getting from communication, getting beyond collaboration, and really being into the cooperation.
It's interesting if you just use this picture, this visual picture, because I love challenging people to look at stuff, and you don't present them with a color, and you ask people to just use red and green. Which do you want and which don't you want at one level, and then do the same thing again at the management level and show them the side-by-side comparisons. That's just amazing to see how people react.
I want people to see the next slide. Quickly close the poll. I think 56% of you have voted, so I cover the results in a minute. I wanted to show you this slide, as it's very much the journey that Daniel and I take people on when we help them do a cultural transformation. What we're trying to get to, or what we're coaching people towards, is the ability to trace an idea all the way through the process and back into the realization where a customer is actually using it, and then getting that really tight feedback loop back into ideation. And people find this really hard to do when their culture's not right, because their culture doesn't allow for flow. There's so much waste in it. There are so many kind of handoffs and opportunities to put feedback into things. There are so many constraints and barriers that people are kind of butting their heads against. What would Daniel, if there was one thing that you said that stopped organisations we work with doing this today, can you put your finger on the key thing that is the key barrier for people to just go, right, let's just measure this?
Okay, yep, that's a tough question. I think language.
Okay.
What do we mean by DevOps in an organization? Just give your own definition. It's moved beyond the thing between Dev and Ops. It's larger than that now. It is, like we say, from the time you have some bright idea and develop it to the time it goes live and is now operational. So get that language in place. And I think if everyone is speaking the same way, and I do mean everyone top down, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, that common vocabulary, we hear that a lot. So let's have a quick look at that results from that third poll that we just did. So pretty strong results there. So lots of people doing experimentation and learning, which is fantastic. Lots of measurements. So we've mentioned CALMs and CAMs a few times in this call. M being for measurement or metrics, being a core thing that we need to do to get this deep level of understanding of what we do and be able to receive and act upon feedback. Multidisciplinary teams, a bit lower. Working hard in a fluid but focused manner. Okay, so people are probably working hard but maybe not fluidly focused, so I'm going to assume or interpret from that one. And a reasonable amount of knowledge sharing, so that's quite a positive result. Poll. Thank you everyone who participated in that one. So this is Dan Pink, and Dan Pink has a TED Talk which I really love, which he talks about motivations, he talks about rewards and intrinsic and extrinsic. What he's really saying is that the way that people are most rewarded is when they work in an environment where they feel that they have these three things. autonomy and mastery and purpose. So for me, if we can look at kind of the steps to making cultural change, this is kind of key, I think, for we talked about baselining, and there are fairly tactical ways to baseline your current culture, basically polling people in your organisation on some carefully chosen questions about how I've talked about a few already. Change, failure, blame, how ideas are received and acted upon. Job titles and roles is another really interesting one. How people think they're being rewarded, how they think the teams function, all of those kind of things. And then the second thing is to really gain a deeper understanding. So you've got this snapshot position, but then spend some more time, learn about your organisation's why that we just talked about a few minutes ago. Do some value stream mapping, and Daniel's the king of this. So, just in words, Daniel, what's the point of value stream mapping? What's the output?
Trying to figure out why we keep using measures or metrics or words or processes or tools that don't help us across the value stream from the customer's perspective. So are we removing an obstacle? Are we achieving a goal of the customer, not just doing something for IT's sake? And I think value stream in IT really puts that picture up in front of everybody so that they have that aha moment. And they can start to do what you've identified here, which is document that plan.
Yeah, so they get that, as part of that mapping, they get that future state, don't they? They start understanding where these constraints and bottlenecks and where this waste is. And I put document a plan in green because really that's the kind of guts for how to make the cultural change. And that does vary quite considerably from organisation to organisation. We've touched on a few things today, like embracing agile can make a big difference on how things are delivered and how retrospectives or postmortems are handled. We've talked about potential implementation of technologies that help people collaborate and also that can help automate processes, which means that things become much easier when they're templated and consistent and done regularly. We talked about common vocabulary. So you can decide on a common vocabulary, but then you need to socialise it and you need to train people in what you're talking about when you talk about, give me an example, Daniel, I don't know, waste. What does waste mean to a particular organisation? And then you can start changing then. Once you keep on practicing this, it becomes like muscle memory, so it will be normal. So when we talk about getting away from release weekends, then we talk about making releases like breathing, so like something that you just do all the time, so often that you don't even really think about it.
And I think the important thing to note is that this is not a long-term plan. This should be like in 2-week sprints. You should be going through all 7 steps.
So iterative, absolutely.
Yep. Very iterative, very quick. Measure, learn, plan, do, check, act, plan, do, study, adjust.
We're a bit beyond the half hour, so apologies for overrunning slightly today, people. And we do have a few questions. Pranka, did you want to read them out, or are you there and happy with?
Yeah, definitely. So a question on recommended approaches. I've conducted a number of RCAs and I've seen people hide away when faced with fishbone diagrams.
How's it work for Daniel?
Okay. Yep. So I think people look at a fishbone diagram and first of all, they try to put too many things on it. So instead of going from a fish, it becomes a whale. And you should be looking at 5 key things on any fishbone diagram. But the most important thing is what is the problem that you put at the head? And that problem needs to be a problem. A lot of people end up putting a symptom down. So you need to make sure that you've asked the right questions so that whatever you're getting ready to address is really going to help you move forward.
Great. What is another word for failure?
Learning. Deferred success is my favourite one that Daniel uses quite a lot as well. So, yeah, it's recognising that if that thing that you tried didn't work, it's one step on the journey to making something work.
Okay. What is the difference between cooperation and collaboration?
Daniel?
Cooperation and collaboration. Okay, so cooperation is where Helen and I are both working together to help a client, and we're feeding off of each other to help that client. Collaboration is where we share the knowledge all throughout between ourselves and then with the client, such that people are learning at a pace that's comfortable for them.
Okay. And the next question is, so where would you say the Tiger team are on the organizational evolution chart?
An interesting question, and Brian, we should probably have a chat afterwards, because there is another presentation that I quite frequently do about DevOps patterns, and it walks through a typical organizational change that we see. And one of the key moments is the point where people decide in the DevOps world how they're going to introduce DevOps. And lots of people kind of identify DevOps team, and this is kind of often seen as an anti-pattern in the industry because you have just effectively created another silo. But there are some very good, particularly large enterprise examples. Marks and Spencer's is one. So if you look up videos from Johnny Waldridge, who used to be at Marks and Spencer's, now CTO at the Cambridge Thatcher Company, but he explains how he effectively introduced a DevOps Tiger team, and that worked very well. And I think as long as the Tiger team is understood to be evangelists that are evangelizing the transformation and pushing through evolutionary change to everybody, and the ultimate goal of the nirvana of the organization is that everybody understands and is brought into this way of thinking, a Tiger team works very well. But I think they have to be understood to be temporary. And when I say temporary, it's not 6 contractors coming in for 6 months to build a tool chain. This is about fundamental kind of cultural change, as Danny says, establishing common vocabularies, understanding how processes work and how people collaborate across them.
Okay. And our last question is, where do you find the greatest traction at the initial stages with a particular group of stakeholders?
Oh, so I think Danny and I will probably both have things to say about this. I mean, if I take a DevOps perspective on this, DevOps is very much a grassroots movement, but it's a bottom-up, top-down movement. So often the people that are the sensors that are feeling the pain, that really get why this needs to happen, are the people on the ground. But for them to be able to do anything, they need quite visionary exec leaders that will help them and support them. So we have lots of examples of people in organizations that have been given the role to own DevOps, and then they often find that they just become a bucket of people coming to them to ask them to do stuff, and often just to automate things and just perform this task. Whereas actually by being given that role, what the exec sponsor is trying to encourage them to do is to spread that thinking. So where do we find the greatest traction at the initial stages? It varies massively. Again, in the DevOps Patterns Organizational Change presentation that I do quite regularly, I talk about how at the grassroots level, it could quite easily come from QA as much as dev, as much as ops, as often environment or release management that think about it. It could be an architect. So it comes, this kind of cultural change we see from coming all over the place. Daniel, your thoughts?
Well, I think Daniel Card knows how I'm going to answer this, but I always and DevOps likes thinking the other way. So usually when we build a process, we go step 1, step 2, step 3, blah, 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 all the way until the end. And that's nice. And then I go, and now put the customer at the end and go the other way. And it's interesting to see how you think it's all linked together because you went from 1 to 10. But as you go backwards, you start to see where the inconsistencies are. And that's where you start to drive traction. But that really does take courage in an organization and the right people looking at it in the organization to help drive that cultural change.
Great. Well, that's all for the questions. Thank you, Helen and Daniel, for the webcast. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. A follow-up email will be sent out with today's slides and recording. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for your time, everybody.